Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name, of course, is Cesar Chris, and today we're talking about Guild Wars 2. Now, it's been a very exciting week for Guild Wars 2, and for those of you on the channel who are kind of out of the loop for Guild Wars 2, we got our first content drop since Path of Fire. Well, I mean, we've had Halloween, but that's not, that's a festival that's kind of a mishmash of what happens every other year. This is completely new content, and it's one of the biggest patches that's come to Guild Wars 2. It's a triple release as we get a new raid, a new Fractal, and a new Living Story episode, which gives us a new map, new masteries, a lot of new things. Specifically, obviously, it kicks off Living World Season 4, which is going to be a whole new kind of era for Guild Wars 2, and very exciting to see what kind of happens. Obviously, it seems like they've sort of followed in the path of Living World Season 3, where they've been able to introduce a new map every episode, and, well, there's a new map with this one that's quite exciting. It pushes the world of Guild Wars 2 to be as big as it's ever been, as we get to travel far, far south. And it expands the world map, and that's something that I think is very important for veterans of the game who want to see these new areas that we've always hoped to go to. But it's also very important for people who are new to the game, that just, that feeling when you first open the world map and you're like, wow, I can explore all of that. That's crazy. So I think that's a very cool thing. And then we also get to talk about the new raid, which is very exciting, because not only is it a new raid after, 9 months of no raid wing, not to say, that the raid content was, badly handled or anything like that. The content has been so good that I can't really complain, and I've been very entertained to do raids over those months. But let's be honest, we're very excited for a new raid, and this one looks super cool. We're going to the underworld, which sounds just insane. I haven't done a ton of it. I've pretty much just stuck my head in the door to see what's up, but I'm very excited to dive into that over the weekend. The main topic of this video, though, is the third part of this drop, and that is the Fractal. Now, it's a very interesting situation where I was actually the least excited for a new Fractal. Not because I'm not excited about fractals, but actually because of the fact that we've had so many fractals that have come into the game that, it's almost become less of a surprise when they add new fractals. But I was still blown away this patch because there is a new fractal, which it's very different than the other ones, and we'll get into that in a second. Very different than the new ones that have been added, I should say. But not only did they do that, they also revamped the molten boss, or the duo molten boss fractal. The one that's like super quick and everyone loves. That one's been revamped quite a bit to add like another part of the dungeon to it, which is really exciting. I did actually play through it, and I hope to have a video up on that soon enough. And they also made some tweaks to the Mage Trin one, which are very good as well. I mean, it's much more minor in terms of what they changed, but it's made the fight a lot more fluid. And I'd argue to say that one's maybe one of the quicker fractals now, just now that the Molten Duo has been changed so much. Not that it should have been changed too. Sorry, I'm getting off topic. The fractal at hand, Twilight Oasis, this is the new fractal, is very exciting. And this is what you're watching in the background. It's very much focused on Palawa Joko, which is already interesting because it's been a while since we've had a fractal that's about something that's very current in the story. It's obviously not about Arc or the kind of side story that's been going on in the Fractals of the Mist, which is good as well. I think it's nice to kind of take a break from that from a little bit and really focus the story on something more inherent to the actual lore of the game. And what this does very well, that actually is similar to some other fractals we have from the past, is show us a scene from the past. And it's very similar to those ones in a lot of different ways. For instance, the ones I'm comparing it to are Urban Battleground and the Thermonuclear Explosion. Now, those we both know are actual events that have happened in Guild Wars 2. And they both gave us a glimpse into, more details about what actually happened. And now what's already interesting about that is that instead of it just being sort of a made up story, it has to be, hold a bit of truth, and it has to be a lot more careful. So because of that, I would assume that they might have spent a bit more time developing this one. That being said, there's less bosses than there are in some of the other ones they've had. So I don't know, maybe it's more of a mechanical challenge to get these things out instead of the writing and stuff like that. But in terms of the balance of bosses to writing, I think this one tells a lot more story than some of the other ones have, despite the fact that they told their own story. This one tells story in a different way. This one allows you to feel, very much involved with the story instead of just spectating it and killing bosses in sort of a lineup. And there's nothing wrong with that. I actually quite enjoy the new Fractals, how they kind of feel more raid-like. I think it's nice to have a mix of that, but also throwbacks to sort of the old, more open layout. Now, this one's not, fully open either. It's not like a dungeon or anything like that. There's still a pretty set track, but you're kind of, going forward and then going back on the same route, but going up and then down. Like, there's a lot of verticality and stuff like that. For instance, there's a part in the Fractal where you get a super jump, and you get to use that to go from rooftop to rooftop, killing different enemies. And that's something that gives you a whole new feeling of movement that you haven't had in Fractals. Because I think another important thing to understand about Fractals is that they don't have mounts in them, they don't have gliders in them. And because of that, a lot of the movement that we get in it has to be given as special action keys. And we've already seen that as they kind of gave that astral wisp skill in one of the other Fractals, and now we have this jump skill. I think that they're really allowing a bit more movement, because it comes back to that whole problem I had with Guild Wars 2 way back before Heart of Thorns. I always said Guild Wars 2's combat is great in every direction, but it feels like you are locked to the ground. Like, there's no movement in the Z-axis. And I always had a problem with that. Heart of Thorns, Path of Fire, completely revolutionized the game in terms of up and down. But I feel like Fractals is that place where we're still trapped in the past. And I think by adding these movement skills, it really allows for a lot more interesting gameplay, even in this content that has to be kept sort of in the past. And the reason it is like that, for those of you who are kind of out of the loop, is because Fractals of the Mist are part of the core Guild Wars 2 experience. So they can't rely on things that are exclusive to the expansions. Like, we get gliding in Heart of Thorns and mounts in Path of Fire, so those can't be in Fractals at the moment. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future. Maybe once they're like at expansion 5, we'll just get Heart of Thorns and Path of the Fire merged into the regular Guild Wars 2 experience, and it won't matter anymore. But as of now, that's the rule, and that is kind of sad, because it, at that point, whatever new thing comes into the game in terms of movement, it's probably going to be restricted from Fractals. The nice thing, though, is that raids, the other, end game, do allow it. So there's kind of a one that does and one that doesn't kind of situation, which is cool. So let's talk more about the actual Fractal itself. It's about Palawa Joko. We're attacking a sort of village, and you're, trying to attack a Sunspear. And what's very interesting right away is that we're the villains, and we're with Palawa Joko, and he's sort of raised us alongside some minions. And it feels very natural that we're fighting alongside people. And it's pretty cool. There's a lot of monsters to kill. There's a lot of waves of people and stuff like that, which I find very, very enjoyable. And for the, a large part of the fight, it's actually a lot of mobs and stuff like that. This is the big difference that I've seen from the other 3 new ones that have come in that have been, more big boss, a couple trash monsters, big boss, a couple trash monsters. This one is very much, big waves, big waves, big waves. The only really big boss is the very end one, and it is horrible. Okay, so that it's the problem that a lot of people have with this Fractal, is that the last boss is pretty difficult. And for me specifically, I hate fighting Mesmers. I hated Dexera more than I hated anything. And it's kind of a Mesmery fight. They do cycle through the gods, which I think is really cool in the last fight. So I think that's a pretty cool situation, but the Mesmeryness and confusion always hurts me so much. But I didn't think it was that bad. Mind you, what you're watching in this video is not like, tier 4. This is tier 1, just like having fun with like 4 people. So don't take what you see in this video as a accurate representation of difficulty. It's not the case. But I found it fun overall. I would be interested to see how long this one is. I'd also be very interested because I'm sure in terms of the development team, they have a specific target for how long they want fractals to be. Because that's the big problem with fractals right now, is that, each of them give the same rewards. And because of that, they kind of need to take the same amount of time each, or else there's going to be ones that are inherently worse than the others. At this moment, they rebalanced it a bit to make it better. So, for instance, the Molten Duo that, took some people like 5 minutes, now probably has to take between 10 and 15 minutes minimum to do. And I think that was a good balance, because we complain so much about a lot of long ones that need to be shortened. I mean, it's only fair that some of these really short ones get lengthened a bit. And we've already seen some passes for some of the really long ones like Cliffside and stuff like that, which I would argue are still a bit too long, but it would be interesting to know what their goal is for how long a fractal takes and where this one's, stands on that. The other obvious question is, is there a way that they could reward people for longer fractals? I mean, at that point, though, maybe people will just stay in the fractal as long as they can to get better rewards instead of like trying to finish it fast. I don't know. It's a tough balance to strike, but I think this one's a pretty good length. Certainly in our first way through, it didn't take us that long, and we were still trying to figure out a lot of parts. For instance, the jumping around from rooftop to rooftop, it took us a while to figure out that we had to go up, but once you do figure out where you have to go, it's a pretty clear path that makes it pretty quick. And you obviously get used to using the jump skills and like stuff like that, so it does go a lot quicker that way. And you can say that for any of the mechanics in the boss fight and stuff like that as well. So I thought it was really good. The other part of the update that I haven't talked about yet is fractal rewards. Now, for a long time, the fractal relics have been kind of useless for some people, especially if you had all 3 infinite potions. I only have the first 2, so I still need to collect some for the 3rd. But they have addressed that issue this time for people, adding a bunch of different rewards, specifically a few account-bound rewards that just give you account buffs, and they cost a fair bit. But one of the best rewards that I think they added, that I wasn't expecting at all, and it just was a solid choice, was a way to get Mystic Clovers. And that's a really smart thing to do because, it's one of those items that you can't get in a lot of ways. And the ways you do choose to get them are quite expensive usually. So it's a very valuable thing for people to do. I know personally I'm very interested in using Mystic Clovers from Fractals the Mist, because before you pretty much had a few ways you could Mystic Forge them, which was mostly just gold you needed. And then otherwise you could get some from PvP, but it took forever, and you could get some from your monthly reward, but that, that's like 30 days of like logging in to get like 7 of them. So it took a while. So definitely having some more ways to get Mystic Clovers is a pretty big plus. Now, the other big add to the store that I think is fairly good is they added more stat options for some of the ascended rings and stuff like that you can get from there. As I think you can get like all the stats from there now, which is really smart because I always thought it was particularly weird that Fractals was such an easy place to get, ascended rings and stuff like that, but they're garbage stats, so no one wants them. As a new player, it must have been extremely confusing to deal with that. Be like, yo, I got this ascended piece of gear, and then they're like, oh, it's from Fractals, don't worry about it, it's worthless. Like, you know, and I know not all of them were worthless. You could get ascended, you know, berserker stuff, but you couldn't get ascended of, you know, magi's or vipers or anything. And I think that was even kind of the worst part of it, is that you could get one of the prime stat types but not the other ones. So all of a sudden it's a lot easier to get berserkers than it is to get any of the other stats. And to be fair, I think that's kind of how they wanted it for a while, so that it forced people into Heart of Thorns to get those stat types, which you could argue, you know, the pros and cons of. But I think that might have been the reason. Who knows, maybe they just didn't think about it, but I think this is a great change. I think what this really does is it helps solidify fractals as the first piece of endgame content you do to sort of start getting your gear, that pushes you into raids. And I think it needs to have more of a position that way. I know that's kind of, you know, not always the case, because you can actually do raids in exotic gear, and at some point you do need ascended gear in fractals because of the agony. So there's a bit of a contrast there, that I think is still a little bit confusing, because at this point, you know, they're more just two different branches of endgame, one for 5 men and one for 10 men, and maybe that's how they'll stay. But I always hoped that it would be, you know, you go for fractals as well as raids, and, you know, one of them helps you get into the other one a bit more. But that's maybe more of a traditional view, you know, back in WoW, how you do dungeons before you do raids. And, you know, that's a whole different discussion that I don't want to open up, because, you know, people are always heated about it. But the main point here is I really enjoyed this. This patch was great for everything. The amount of content that went into fractals was staggering. They even added some more instabilities, I think, which is crazy. Particularly one that the lower your health is, the slower you move. Sounds like the biggest pain in the world, but also a very interesting mechanic to deal with. So I'm very interested to try it. I know once it happens to me, I'll hate it and regret saying this ever. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun, guys. I really suggest that you step into Guild Wars 2 if you haven't in a while. It's one of the best games for that, because you don't need a subscription. So if you have a Guild Wars 2 account that's just chilling, hop on it and see what's going on. It's a lot of fun that way. You'll probably see some more Guild Wars 2 content coming from me in the next little while here, especially as I look into doing some of these raids that I'm super pumped about. But until then, guys, have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.